All right, so theater seating, the seating section in a theater has 27 seats in the first row, 29 seats rather, in the second row, and so on and so forth. So it's, it's kind of, if you looked at it from above, it'd be kind of a triangular type of deal where you'd have a certain number of seats here, and then it would increase a little, a few more seats up there, and then a few more. So, okay, well, what do you notice about the number of seats? So if we actually write it out, it'd be 27 in the first row, 29. Can you predict in the second row? Can you predict in the third row how many there'd be? 31, and then on and on and on, right? Not on. Eventually it ends, but you get the idea. So what do they want here? It says how many seats are in the 10th row, and then after the comma it says how many seats are there in the whole section. Let's start with how many seats are in the 10th row. So what does the counter, it's important to start recognizing what the counter gives you. This is A1 is 27, A2 is 29, A3 is 31. What does the counter, the index, correspond to in this particular problem? What does the index, the subscript, correspond to in this particular problem? In the theater, what does the subscript correspond to? The row number, right? A1, stands for the number of seats in the first row. A3 stands for the number of seats in the third row. So what, in this sentence, in this first part of the sentence, how many seats are in the 10th row? Symbolically, A subscript what is it asking us to find? It's asking us to find A10. All right, so A10 is what we're looking for. I suppose we could find it recursively, but let's work on the explicit formula. What would the explicit formula AN be? So just since you probably don't have it memorized yet, A1 plus N minus 1 times D. Can you fill this in for me? What's A1 in this case? That would be the 27, right? Plus N minus 1 times, what would D be? What is this increasing by each time? So if you add 2, you get 29. If you add 2, you get 31. So D is 2. Oh, so that's your nth term formula. That's almost the whole ball game, right? What do I do with this formula to find A10? Plug in 10. So 27 plus 10 minus 1 times 2. What does that turn out to be? 9 times 2. 27 plus 18, what's that? 45. So 45 what? Always important to, if it's an applied problem, write down what it is you're counting or looking at. Okay? We're not done, but does that make sense so far? Now, after the comma, it says, how many seats are there in the section that we're talking about? So yeah, and what kind of symbolism are we going to use here that we've developed in this section? The S subscript whatever symbolism, right? So we're after S, what's the subscript? 10. There's 10 rows altogether if you read it. So we're after S10. So that, what does that represent? Just to kind of quiz you a little bit. What is that verbally anyway? Yeah, the sum of all the seats in the first 10 rows, right? Yeah. No, you're right. I wasn't correcting you. You're right. It's the sum of all the seats that we're looking at, but to be specific, it's the sum of all the seats in the first 10 rows. So in other words, it's A1 plus A2 plus A3. So remember what A1 represents, the number of seats in the entire first row. It's A1, the number of seats in the first row, plus A2, the number of seats in the second row, plus A3, the number of seats in the third row, all the way up, plus A10, the number of seats in the 10th row. Yeah, we're definitely going to use the formula here. Let me remind you what it is. Sn is n over 2. You got it memorized already. See, you've written it down 3 times and you memorized it. Can you fill it in for me? What goes in here? 10 over 2. What's A1? A1 is 27. I thought I heard 7. 27 plus, okay, what, in this case, what is a n? A sub 10. What is a 10? Well, good news, we found it in the first part of the problem. So in this particular problem, n is 10, so it's 10 over 2. And then in here it's a1 plus a10, right? So a1 is 27, that's what I have here, plus a10, which we already found. If we hadn't already found it, what would you have to do? You'd have to go back and use the explicit formula, maybe create the explicit formula if we hadn't used it in the first part of the problem, and find a10 that way. Does that make sense? So we already did it here. You might have to, if we hadn't done this work and it only asked you to find this, you'd have to do this first, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so now what do we have? 5 on the outside. What's 27 plus 45? 72. What's 5 times 72? 360 what? Seats. In the section, yeah, to be specific.